You're standing in a checkout line. Your phone battery died 2 minutes ago, and now there's nothing left to look at but the tabloid rack, the gum display, and the back of a stranger's cart. 10 seconds pass. Then it happens. Your thumb twitches toward your pocket, reaching for a screen that isn't there. Your chest tightens, just slightly, the way it does right before you notice you're uncomfortable. You shift your weight. You glance around for anything to look at. You check the time on a clock you already know is slow. You call this feeling boredom, and you assume every human who has ever lived has felt exactly what you're feeling right now. Standing in that line, staring at nothing, waiting for something to fill the silence. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Because for most of the time your species has existed on this planet, empty, unstructured time wasn't a problem that needed solving. It was the raw material your entire species was built out of. To understand what's happening in that checkout line, you have to go back roughly 200,000 years to small bands of early humans moving across the grasslands and river valleys of Africa. You've probably pictured their days as one long, exhausting scramble to survive. Hunting from sunrise, gathering until dark, barely enough time to breathe, let alone get bored. That picture, it turns out, is mostly wrong. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee spent months living alongside the Jew/Hwansi-San people of the Kalahari Desert in Botswana. Researchers still treat groups like this one as one of the closest living windows into how early humans might have organized their time, since they survived for generations as hunter-gatherers in a way modern industrial life never has. Lee expected to find people working from dawn until dusk just to stay alive. Instead, he found something that looked almost like a part-time job. By his count, adults spent somewhere around 15 to 20 hours a week gathering food and hunting. That's less time than most people you know spend at the office. So where did the rest of the day go? It didn't go to more chores, and it didn't go to more errands. Some of it went to making and repairing tools, turning a plain stone or a length of wood into something more useful, then improving it again the next day for no urgent reason at all. Some of it went to teaching children how to track an animal or find water hidden under dry sand. Some of it went to napping in the shade, grooming each other, or simply sitting together doing very little at all. In other words, a huge portion of an early human's waking life was made up of exactly the kind of open, unscheduled time your modern calendar barely has a name for. And somewhere in all of that open time, humans started painting on the walls of caves. Deep inside places like Lascaux in France or Chauvet, not far from it, early humans crawled into total darkness carrying nothing but a flame and spent hours shaping horses, lions, and bison out of pigment and stone. None of it fed anyone. None of it built a single shelter. It only makes sense if you accept one strange idea. That boredom, or something very close to it, was not an enemy to defeat, but a space where the species quietly practiced becoming itself. Decades after Lee's fieldwork, an anthropologist named Polly Wiesner set out to figure out what filled the quietest of those hours, studying the same Jew/Hwansi communities that Lee had documented. She recorded conversations throughout the day and night, then compared them. During daylight, talk was practical. Complaints about a disappointing hunt, arguments over how to divide meat, gossip, minor conflicts, the ordinary friction of people living in close quarters. But once the sun went down and the fires were lit, something changed. The complaints faded into the background, and the talk turned almost entirely to stories. Myths about distant ancestors, tales of relatives living in far-off camps, legends explaining why the stars sat where they did, or why a particular animal behaved the way it did. Wiesner found that firelight conversation carried a completely different emotional weight than daytime talk, one built for connection instead of conflict, for imagination instead of logistics. That unstructured, seemingly unproductive time after dark wasn't wasted at all. It was where the stories lived. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The empty hours your ancestors had, the ones with nothing urgent to react to and nothing pressing to finish, weren't a glitch in their survival strategy. They were arguably the engine behind a huge amount of what makes your species unusual in the first place. Telling stories around a fire does more than pass the time. It rehearses social bonds between people who might need to trust each other during the next crisis. It carries history forward without writing anything down. It builds a shared imagination across an entire group, letting people plan together, cooperate, and predict each other's behavior in ways no other animal manages at that scale. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying exactly this kind of behavior, arguing that as early human groups grew too large for everyone to bond the way apes do, through physical grooming, one-on-one, conversation may have taken over that role instead. Talking, in other words, became a way of grooming an entire group at once. Idle chatter around a fire wasn't the opposite of bonding. It was bonding, stretched across more people than touch alone could ever reach. There's a matching signature of all this sitting inside your own skull right now. Neuroscientists studying the brain noticed something odd decades ago. Even when a person isn't doing anything, isn't solving a problem or focusing on a task, their brain doesn't go quiet. A whole network of regions lights up instead. One the researcher Marcus Reichel helped identify and name the default mode network, the brain's setting when it turns away from the outside world and inward, toward memory, imagined conversations, and half-formed plans for the future. Your brain, in other words, was built to wander the moment you stop giving it a task. That wandering isn't a malfunction. It's where a surprising amount of your own creativity and problem-solving quietly gets done. The same way an idle evening around a fire once turned into a myth explaining the stars. So maybe boredom, for your ancestors, didn't feel like an itch that needed scratching. Maybe it felt like an open door, one their own minds were already built to walk through. So why does yours feel like a locked room? In 2014, a psychologist named Timothy Wilson ran an experiment that sounds almost too strange to be real. He asked participants to sit alone in an empty room for somewhere between 6 and 15 minutes with nothing to do. No phone, no book, no other person, just their own thoughts. Beforehand, most people predicted they'd find it mildly unpleasant at worst. Then Wilson gave some participants one more option, a button on the table in front of them that would deliver a small, genuinely uncomfortable electric shock. A surprising number of them pressed it, choosing a jolt of real physical pain over several more minutes of sitting quietly with their own minds. Not because the shock felt good, because doing nothing felt worse. Sit with that for a second. The species that once filled its empty hours with myth, memory, and connection now finds those same empty hours almost unbearable. Somewhere between the firelit nights of the Kalahari and the fluorescent lights of your checkout line, boredom stopped feeling like an invitation and started feeling like a threat you needed to neutralize immediately. Part of that shift comes down to a mismatch your brain never signed up for. It evolved expecting unstructured time to be filled with other people, voices, faces, shared stories passed back and forth across a fire, each one demanding your attention for minutes at a time. Instead, your unstructured time now gets filled with a screen offering something faster, brighter, and far less demanding than an actual story ever was. One video, one scroll, one notification at a time, each one small enough to swallow without chewing, and each one gone before it has the chance to mean anything. Your brain still craves the kind of stimulation your ancestors once got from each other. It just settles for whatever's closest, because closest is easier than waiting for something real. Part of why it settles so easily has nothing to do with willpower. Every scroll, every refresh, every notification is built around the same unpredictable reward pattern that keeps a slot machine pulling people back long after they meant to stop. You never know exactly when the next post will make you laugh or the next message will matter. So you keep checking the same way your ancestors might have kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting movement. The tree line, at least, was checking for something that could kill you. The feed is just checking for something to feel. Watch a child today, handed a tablet the moment a car ride gets quiet, and you're watching the same substitution happen one generation earlier than it happened to you. The long, empty afternoons that once forced kids to invent their own games, build their own worlds out of sticks and dirt and imaginary rules, get filled instead with something built by someone else, arriving pre-chewed and ready to swallow. Nobody's forcing that trade. It just happens to be the easiest option in the room, every single time boredom shows up asking to be felt. And the nearest replacement rarely asks anything of you the way an actual story, told by an actual person around an actual fire, once did. It doesn't ask you to remember it. It doesn't ask you to pass it on. It just asks you to keep scrolling. You're standing in a checkout line again. This time, your phone is fully charged, sitting heavy in your pocket. 10 seconds pass, and your thumb twitches toward it out of habit. But for just a moment, you let it stay where it is. You let the silence sit there, unfilled, the way it once sat around a fire that hasn't existed for 10,000 years. Nothing rushes in to fill it. No feed refreshes, no fire crackles nearby, no voice starts a story about ancestors you never met. But the space is still there, sitting quietly in your chest, exactly the shape it always was. And for the first time in a long while, it doesn't feel like something is missing. It feels like something ancient, finally, has room to breathe.